In the early 1930s, Jamaica was a land of deep struggle and simmering discontent. The island was a British colony, a place where the legacy of slavery cast a long, dark shadow over the lives of the black majority. Most people lived in crushing poverty, working on sugar plantations for meager wages that barely kept them alive. The economic system was designed to benefit the white colonial masters and a small local elite, leaving the descendants of enslaved Africans with little opportunity for advancement. The land they tilled was not their own, and the fruits of their labor were shipped across the ocean to enrich a distant empire. It was a time of hardship, where dreams seemed to die before they could even take root. The social conditions were just as oppressive as the economic ones. Under colonial rule, black Jamaicans were taught to see themselves as inferior. Their African heritage was denigrated, their skin color was a mark of disadvantage, and their culture was suppressed. The official institutions, the schools, the courts, and the churches, all reinforced a European worldview that placed whiteness at the pinnacle of civilization. This psychological burden was heavy, creating a deep sense of alienation and a longing for dignity and self-worth. People felt disconnected from their own identity, forced to navigate a world that constantly told them they were less than human. This environment of systemic oppression created a fertile ground for a new message of hope. Amidst this despair, a powerful voice of resistance and pride began to echo through the Caribbean and the world. This was the voice of Marcus Mosiah Garvey, a Jamaican national hero who founded the Universal Negro Improvement Association, or UNIA. Garvey's message was a radical departure from the colonial narrative. He preached black pride, self-reliance, and economic independence. He told people of African descent to look not to Europe for salvation, but to Africa, their ancestral homeland. Garvey's words were like a cool drink of water in a scorching desert, inspiring millions to lift their heads and reclaim their heritage with pride. He awakened a consciousness that had been dormant for centuries. Garvey's teachings planted the seeds of a profound spiritual and political awakening. He encouraged Jamaicans to see their blackness not as a curse, but as a source of strength and beauty. He organized people, built businesses, and created a global movement aimed at the upliftment of the entire African diaspora. His philosophy, often called Garveyism, provided a blueprint for liberation, not just from physical chains, but from the mental slavery that held people captive. It was this powerful foundation of black consciousness, this yearning for a return to greatness, that prepared the hearts and minds of many Jamaicans for the incredible events that were about to unfold across the Atlantic. Marcus Garvey was more than just a political leader. For many, he was a prophet. His words carried the weight of divine inspiration, offering a vision of a future where black people would reclaim their rightful place in the world. Among his many powerful declarations, one particular statement stood out and became the cornerstone of the Rastafari faith. Garvey famously told his followers, "Look to Africa, when a black king shall be crowned, for the day of deliverance is near." This was not just a casual remark, it was a profound prophecy that ignited a fire of anticipation in the hearts of his followers in Jamaica. It was a promise of redemption, a sign that their long exile was coming to an end. The importance of this prophecy cannot be overstated. For a people who had been systematically oppressed for generations, the idea of a black king was revolutionary. In a world dominated by white monarchs and colonial governors, the image of a powerful, sovereign black ruler was a symbol of ultimate vindication. It meant that God had not forgotten them. It suggested that their history, which began with kings and queens in Africa, would come full circle. The prophecy gave them a specific event to watch for, a tangible sign that would herald their liberation. It transformed their passive waiting into an active, hopeful vigil, scanning the horizon for news from the motherland. This prophecy was a direct challenge to the colonial power structure and the religious teachings that upheld it. The churches in Jamaica often depicted God and all biblical figures as white, reinforcing the idea of European supremacy. Garvey's prophecy, however, pointed toward a black redeemer, a figure who would reflect the image of the people he came to save. This was a radical reinterpretation of Scripture, one that placed Africa and its people at the center of the divine plan. It empowered Jamaicans to look for God within their own racial identity, to see divinity in blackness. The prophecy was an act of theological decolonization. The message resonated so deeply because it spoke directly to the spiritual and material needs of the people. They were poor, landless, and disenfranchised, They prayed for a deliverer, a Messiah who would lead them out of their suffering, much like Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt. Garvey's words provided a framework for this hope, linking their struggle in Jamaica to a grand unfolding drama on the African continent. The prophecy of a crowned king in Africa became the focal point of their collective dream, a promise that their deliverance was not just possible, but imminent. The stage was set for a miracle. On November 2, 1930, news that seemed to fulfill Marcus Garvey's prophecy flashed across the world. In Addis Ababa, the capital of Ethiopia, Rastafari Makonnen was crowned Emperor of Ethiopia. He took the regal name Haile Selassie I, which means Power of the Trinity. His official titles were breathtaking and resonated with biblical significance. King of Kings, Lord of Lords, Conquering Lion of the tribe of Judah. For the struggling people of Jamaica, who had been clinging to Garvey's words, this was the sign they had been waiting for. The Black King had been crowned, and the day of deliverance, they believed, was truly at hand. The news spread like wildfire through the poor communities of Kingston and the rural parishes. The coronation of Haile Selassie I was not just a political event, it was seen as a divine revelation. Ethiopia held a special place in the hearts of many Jamaicans. It was one of the only African nations to have successfully resisted European colonization, a proud symbol of black sovereignty. Furthermore, it had deep biblical roots, mentioned in the Psalms as a land that would stretch out her hands unto God. The new emperor himself claimed to be a direct descendant of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, linking him to the royal lineage of the Bible. For the early Rastas, this was undeniable proof. Haile Selassie was not just a king, he was the returned Messiah, the living God. This interpretation marked a profound turning point. It transformed Garvey's political philosophy into a new and vibrant religion. The coronation gave a face and a name to their hope. It was a moment of incredible empowerment. Suddenly, the God they worshipped was not a distant white figure in the sky, but a living, breathing black man, a king sitting on a throne in Africa. This realization fundamentally shifted their worldview. They began to call themselves Rastafari, in honor of the emperor's pre-coronation name. They saw themselves as the true Israelites in exile, and Haile Selassie I was the Redeemer who would lead them home to the promised land of Africa. The event galvanized a small but growing number of Jamaicans who began to preach this new doctrine. They studied the Bible with fresh eyes, finding passages that they believed foretold the coming of Haile Selassie. They rejected the teachings of the colonial churches, which they now saw as instruments of oppression. The coronation provided the spark that ignited the Rastafari movement. It was the moment when prophecy became reality, when a long-held dream took on the solid form of a living king. From that day forward, the history of Jamaica and the spiritual landscape of the world would be forever changed by this coronation across the sea. As the news of Haile Selassie's coronation electrified Jamaica, it was a man named Leonard Percival Howell who emerged as the first and most influential preacher of the new Rastafari doctrine. Howell, a well-traveled man who had been a soldier and a follower of Marcus Garvey, began to teach that Haile Selassie I was the living God and the savior of the black race. His message was simple, direct, and powerful. He declared that black people should pledge their allegiance not to the King of England but to the King of Ethiopia. He called for repatriation to Africa and denounced the colonial system as Babylon, a corrupt and oppressive force. Howell's teachings were considered dangerous and subversive by the colonial authorities. He was arrested multiple times for sedition, but his resolve never weakened. After his release from prison, he sought to create a self-sufficient community where Rastas could live according to their beliefs, free from the harassment of Babylon. In 1940, he purchased a property in the hills of St. Catherine called Pinnacle. This became the first autonomous Rasta community, a place of refuge and a living experiment in communal living. At Pinnacle, Howell and his followers practiced a lifestyle that was radically different from mainstream Jamaican society. Life at Pinnacle was organized around the principles of self-reliance and communalism. The residents grew their own food, primarily following a vegetarian diet that would later become known as Ital. They cultivated ganja, which they regarded as a holy herb for spiritual reasoning and meditation, a sacrament that brought them closer to Jah, or God. The community provided a space where Rasta families could raise their children with a sense of black pride and African identity, away from the colonial school system. Pinnacle was more than just a settlement, it was a symbol of resistance. A state within a state that rejected the authority of the colonial government and created its own social order. For over a decade, Pinnacle thrived, becoming a beacon for the growing Rastafari movement. It was a place where the culture of Rastafari could develop and flourish. The rhythms of Nyabingi drumming, the intellectual discussions known as reasoning, and the distinctive dreadlocked hairstyle all took root within this pioneering community. Although Pinnacle was eventually destroyed by police raids in the 1950s, its legacy was immense. Leonard Howell, the first Rasta, had successfully planted the seed of the movement in Jamaican soil, and the dispersal of the Pinnacle residents helped to spread the Rastafari message to every corner of the island, ensuring its survival and growth. From its very inception, the Rastafari movement faced intense persecution from Jamaican society and the colonial state. The message of Rastafari was a direct threat to the established order. By declaring allegiance to a foreign emperor and rejecting colonial authority, Rastas were seen as traitors and troublemakers. Their appearance, particularly the growing of dreadlocks, was viewed as unkempt and uncivilized. Their use of ganja as a sacrament was criminalized, and their refusal to participate in the mainstream economy was seen as laziness. The police, the courts, and the press all joined in a campaign to demonize and suppress the movement. This persecution took many forms, from daily harassment to brutal acts of violence. Rastas were routinely arrested, their homes were raided, and their locks were forcibly cut by police officers in a humiliating act meant to strip them of their identity and faith. The destruction of Howell's Pinnacle community in the 1950s was a major blow, but it was not an isolated incident. One of the most infamous events was the Coral Gardens incident of 1963, where a violent confrontation led to a state-sanctioned crackdown. The government declared Bad Friday, ordering police and soldiers to round up and imprison any and all Rastas, whether they were involved or not. Many were beaten, tortured, and had their locks trimmed. Paradoxically, this relentless persecution did not destroy the Rastafari movement, it made it stronger. The hardships they faced seemed to confirm their worldview. The police and government were the modern-day agents of Babylon, the oppressive system foretold in the scriptures. Every arrest, every beating, every act of discrimination was seen as a trial by fire, a test of their faith. This shared suffering forged an unbreakable bond of solidarity among believers. It forced them to rely on each other for support, creating a close-knit community that was resilient and determined to survive against all odds. Their faith was not just a belief system, it was a shield against the hostility of the outside world. The experience of persecution also deepened their spiritual convictions. It reinforced their identity as a chosen people living in exile, suffering for their beliefs just as the early Christians had. They saw their struggle as a righteous one, a spiritual war against the forces of evil. This perspective gave them the strength to endure unimaginable hardship without losing hope. Instead of abandoning their faith, they held on even tighter, their dreadlocks growing back longer and their chants becoming louder. The fire of Babylon, intended to consume them, instead served to purify and temper their resolve, transforming a small, marginalized sect into a powerful and enduring spiritual force. As the Rastafari movement grew stronger through its trials, it developed a rich and powerful set of symbols that expressed its core beliefs. The most visible of these is the flag of red, gold, and green. These colors, taken from the Ethiopian flag, are sacred to Rastas. The red represents the blood of the martyrs, the sacrifice made by Africans during slavery, and the ongoing struggle against oppression. The gold symbolizes the wealth of Africa, the riches that were stolen by colonizers. The green represents the lush and fertile land of Ethiopia, the promised land, Zion. Together, these colors are a constant reminder of their history, their identity, and their destiny. The concepts of Zion and Babylon are central to the Rasta worldview. Zion is not just a place on a map, it is the Rastafari ideal, a spiritual and physical homeland. It represents Africa, specifically Ethiopia, a place of freedom, harmony, and divinity. Repatriation, or the return to Zion, is a core aspiration of the faith. In contrast, Babylon represents the corrupt, oppressive, and materialistic world of the West. It is the system of colonial and post-colonial Jamaica, the police, the government, and all institutions that perpetuate injustice. To a Rasta, life is a spiritual journey out of Babylon and toward Zion, a struggle for liberation from both mental and physical bondage. Perhaps the most powerful vehicle for spreading the Rastafari message has been music. The early drumming and chanting of the Nyabingi order created the spiritual heartbeat of the movement. But it was the emergence of reggae music in the late 1960s and 1970s that took the Rasta philosophy to the world stage. Artists like Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, and Burning Spear became international ambassadors for the faith. Their songs were not just entertainment, they were sermons, filled with messages of resistance, calls for justice, and praises to Jah Rastafari. Reggae music translated the Rasta experience into a universal language of struggle and hope that resonated with oppressed people everywhere. The birth of Rastafari is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It grew from the painful soil of colonial Jamaica, watered by the memory of Africa, and nurtured by the hope of freedom. The movement was truly crystallized on April 21, 1966, when Emperor Haile Selassie III visited Jamaica. The overwhelming, ecstatic welcome he received from tens of thousands of Rastas confirmed the depth of their faith. It was a movement born of pain, prophecy, and pride. It represents a powerful act of resistance, a refusal to accept inferiority, and a bold declaration of a divine African identity, a message that continues to inspire millions around the globe.